we sort of call these our open source meetups, and that has a particular meaning for us. You know, at AirTree, obviously we have the privilege of kind of working alongside and seeing inside a bunch of the world's best technology founders and operators and investors. And the point of these meetups is really to open up some of those networks and some of those conversations to the rest of you in the community, in the hope that we can all learn from each other and get better and build a better startup ecosystem. And this meetup is a perfect example of that, actually. I've had the pleasure of you know, getting coffees with Tobi a few times and riffing on the future of the fitness industry, and frankly geeking out on subscription unit economics and talking about what it takes to build a real community. And for clarity, Sweat isn't a portfolio company of ours, and in fact they've never raised money from anyone. So this is really just like opening up one of those conversations that Tobi and I have from time to time to the rest of you. I'll just repeat my request if everyone could Zoom themselves. So by Zoom I mean mute. I think you're all coming in unmuted, unfortunately. So I'd love this to be more than just a conversation between Tobi and me. Please feel free to post any questions you have for Tobi in the chat throughout. You know, anything that he or I say that's of interest, pop it in the chat. I'll make sure to keep an eye on that and cover off all the issues that you guys are interested in. And I'd much rather we cover the things that you raise than the things I have. So please go ahead and be active in there. Before we kick off with Tobi, as you guys know, you know, when there is major news in the startup ecosystem, we often do a little news segment up top. I thought I might just take a quick chance to open up with what sounds like a boring topic, but actually is an important topic, which is the changes to the R&D tax incentives that were announced in last night's budget. So this is meaningful for everyone on this call because most of you are founders. The government's announced what they forecast to be a $2 billion increase in R&D tax incentives. First off, this is great news. This is something that we have been lobbying for on your behalf extensively behind the scenes, and which is a sort of welcome change in direction in policy from the coalition on this. The key points that you care about are that the refundable rate will now be 18.5% above your company tax rate, which for most of you should be a bigger R&D tax refund than you previously received. They've removed the $4 million annual cap on refunds. Clearly, for most of you, that won't be relevant. We'll be watching closely to see what the big companies do here. Like, let's hope they don't screw it up for all of us. And the thing that hasn't been sort of announced as much, but which is, I think, equally, if not more important to you guys, is that we're expecting much less aggressive retrospective audits from the tax office on previously submitted tax claims. And this was a huge issue for startups in our portfolio. And I know for a bunch of you who had, you know, submitted your R&D claims through PwC or EY or, you know, a legitimate organization, but then we're kind of reeling under the uncertainty of whether you could rely on that refund and whether you'd be audited down the track. And so what we're hearing is that you can now start to rely much more strongly on refunds you have previously received. Our advice continues to be to get, you know, a top tier accounting firm to submit your claims and, you know, to do so appropriately. But I think the uncertainty surrounding some of that is going away, at least in the short term, which is great news. So that's all positive news. You know, I can't help but sort of jab a little bit. This is a change in a negative direction rather than a sort of massive positive thing. When the coalition came to power, the R&D spend annually was $17 billion. This change brings it back up to $13 billion. So still a long way to go. Still a ways behind, you know, comparable OECD countries, but this is a good change from the budget and it's moving things in the right direction. And rest assured that we will keep lobbying hard on your behalf on this issue because I think it affects all of us. So with that little fun tax announcement out of the way, let's move on to what you all came to hear, which is the story of Sweat and the insights from Tobi Pearce, its CEO. I can't actually see Tobi. Tobi, can you just say something so I can get you on my screen before I introduce you? Awkward if Tobi's not here anymore.
Hello, sorry mate, I couldn't unmute myself because I got muted before as a part of the group mute.
All good,
Yeah,
all good.
definitely here.
So welcome to Toby. Thank you very much for joining us from Adelaide for this one. I'm excited about this conversation. Sweat is one of the sleeping giants of the Aussie startup scene, which is kind of weird because you've all heard of Kayla Itsinas, Toby's co-founder, and yet the company itself, while it's raised its profile a ton, still isn't as well known as many of the big startup brands in Australia, and we're doing our best to change that. So Toby joins us. He's the CEO of the company. He and Kayla were both personal trainers when they co-founded Sweat together in 2015. I think Toby dropped out of uni to do so. I'll get him to confirm that when we start. And so they really sort of split the responsibilities of the business. Toby runs, the business itself, all internal aspects. And my understanding is that Kayla heads up marketing and community and, all sort of customer facing aspects of their business. So it's a nice complementary split between them. They've been on an absolute user growth tear. As I said, started in 2015. They now have a global community of over 50 million women who are part of Sweat. It's a completely bootstrapped company that's hit some very, very impressive revenue figures along the way. So delighted to have you join us, Toby. Thanks for taking the time. And let's jump into the story. Maybe if we could, for those of our audience who aren't familiar with you or with the Sweat story, maybe you could just kick us off with a bit of background on yourself and a quick sort of 5-minute walk through how you got to now.
Yeah, sure. I'll do my best to run through it, as quickly as possible and keep it interesting where possible. But you're right about the uni piece. So Kayla and I met, and we were both doing personal training, to a whole variety of stuff. Boot camps, outdoors and parks, working in gyms and studios, all that sort of stuff. At that particular point in time, I was at university doing a double degree in commerce and law, mostly because I wasn't sure what was better or more applicable to do. I loved business, but I didn't really know what the right study was at the time. We had some really good success, as personal trainers, I think, as individuals, but we were, sort of right at the beginning of the uproar, of social media. And I guess when I say social media, I don't necessarily mean Facebook. That has sort of already happened or was happening. But I think there was a new wave of action happening in Instagram. And so we, because we've been getting quite good results and good throughput with our clients, I guess sort of, in real life per se, we started to tell their stories, and telling their stories sort of online at this particular point in time, and in the way that we chose to tell those stories was really interesting. For our audience, both sort of domestically and abroad. And so, somewhere along the journey there, we, decided that, perhaps it would be a good idea to kind of package up effectively the experience that we were providing in person, created the content that we could, provide to other women. And so I think, we did this as an ebook, and it's probably worthwhile noting that, at this point in time in history, just sort of 2013, when we sort of started, really getting into this, the mobile app scene was not at all, what it is today. Like, you couldn't even put a video on Instagram. Like, we're like way back when, sort of performance marketing as a term was really early on in its journey. Advertising on Facebook, it sort of was just becoming conventionalized and sort of broadly, accepted. So it was a very, very different time. And, the ebook for us was sort of like a light touch, what we thought to be relatively low risk, way of kind of getting in and seeing what happened and what people liked. And so we did that, and that took off really well. People at market loved that for a variety of different reasons. But, if I had to summarize, probably, one, because it worked really well. We got the results that she wanted. Two, I think that, although it was a relatively simple product, it was just in a book, like, it was ultimately quite enjoyable. And fitness is meant to be fun. It's not meant to be a chore. And I think probably last, but definitely not least, I think, we really positioned ourselves as a way to help improve women's lives and mindsets and how they felt about themselves, rather than positioning ourselves as a cure to the disease that is not having a perfect six pack, that the rest of the fitness industry would kind of market. And so I really think that helped us get great throughput and engagement early on. And ultimately, off the back of that, we had some tremendous early on success. We toured the world running sort of, boot camp events to women in a variety of different countries and continents. We had sort of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 women in stadiums and ovals and massive parks all over the world running events. And we, along the journey, kind of, you had a really great bunch of, like, I guess, anecdotal sort of like qualitative learning, that we're able to get from our members at these events. And that was really that, well, they loved our product, but they wanted more. They wanted more variety. They wanted a more digital experience. As the beginning of the world was beginning to become sort of everyone has to have a mobile app, which is kind of assumed today, but it definitely wasn't at that point. And so this would have been sort of, end of 2014, early 2015, and we sort of decided, well, there's a couple of key things here that we want to do if we want to stay aligned to our mission, which is really empowering women with fitness. And so a couple of the points of acceptance here for us really were, well, we have to be mobile. Like, this is where it's all going. It's going into the future. And we have to find a way to provide her more variety. And we kind of used this slogan, which was, we wanted to provide a workout for any woman, anywhere, anytime. And how do we make that, how do we bring that to life, basically? And I think also there was kind of a really interesting shift for the digital content space. Again, at this point in time, the subscription model has been around for decades, but I think as it relates to sort of direct to consumer mobile on content, it hadn't necessarily been prevalent in at all comparable way to what it is today. And so we sort of we saw the kind of the meeting of a few minds and a couple of stars aligning here for us. And so a variety of content, going from digital content into mobile app distributed content, and then pivoting from a single purchase service to a subscription model were kind of three stars aligning for us effectively. And so we made for at the time, we made a massive investment into this. We sort of unknowingly were pivoting from a ebook business into a software company, which was a really painful transition for us both as like non-technical people. And we ultimately built the first version of the app. And I think I told this story quite a few times. We launched the app in late 2015. We were running a very profitable, very sustainable business at that point, and we tanked it, absolutely tanked it. We had 25,000 complaints on launch day. And you're talking like we had a member support team of like 3 people. So we sort of had all hands on deck, literally everyone responding to emails, trying to keep up with this. But as is the nature of software and kind of, the journey, nothing goes right forever. If anyone ever tells you that, it's a fallacy. It doesn't actually exist. A lot of things go wrong, kind of behind the closed doors of an organization, but it doesn't mean that you can't make progress. And so this was pretty bad. It was pretty bad for us, but ultimately, with the bad comes good, and I think, our mindset at this point in time was, well, we're really excited because the feedback was not so much that the idea was wrong. The feedback was that the execution was wrong, and then we brought it to market and the experience in the wrong way. And so, as is with the nature of sort of any minimum viable product, it was pretty terrible. And version 1.0 was pretty bad. So we iterated and over the following sort of months and years, we stuck to it. We added more trainers, we added more content. We deleted features, we added features, we tweaked features, we did all that sort of stuff. And from sort of 2016 through until now, we've sort of finally started to grasp what it means to run our organization, how to make it work, and ultimately how to get the right insight at the right time and bring it to market in the right way.
Yeah, it's such a good story, and there's so much to unpack in there. I want to start, Tobi, if I can, with the ebook, because I think there's a bunch of interesting things in there. First of all, you essentially financed a subscription business with a profitable ebook business. So you had the innovator's dilemma where you pivot out of a profitable business into an app that otherwise you would have raised venture for, but you had an existing business there. But taking a step even back before that, can you, for all of the people who are interested in kind of growth hacks and marketing, how did you get such take up in the ebook? Because, lots of people have launched books. Not many of them lead to world tours and 5,000 people in German stadiums. Like, give us some more on how you got that first start and why that worked so well.
Yeah, sure. So I think maybe the shortest like headline to that response is that there's never ever like one tactic strategy, right? Like it's not a thing. And for anyone who's, you know, kind of read up at all, you know, to the term that you used, John, you know, on growth hacking, you know, the game is changing all the time. You know, and I think that, you know, part of the art is, you know, kind of figuring out like where is the cheapest access to the highest quality people, you know, at any given point in time. And so, yeah, going back to kind of those days, you know, we really like navigated our way through social media. Like we really did a good job of that, especially on Instagram. I think secondly, at this point in time, because we were, you know, doing pretty well, we were also able to get access to, you know, a higher volume of like low cost, you know, reach sort of on social channels for advertising. So again, at this point, you couldn't actually advertise on Instagram. Like it wasn't available, you know, so it was a very different game then. But on, you know, on Facebook and on email or whatever, at this time, like most of the people in the space were not super sophisticated at that point. So we would run, you know, a variety of different sort of advertising and media campaigns up and down all ends of the funnel to effectively, you know, what we would call like game funnel breadth. You know, so how do we pack the funnel with as many people as possible that match what we're looking for, basically. And yeah, we had heaps of interesting ways of doing that. Yeah, we realized, you know, just you know, basic like 101 economics for email marketing. We realized we could run ads to acquire an email for, you know, a couple of cents per piece to subscribe to our list. We would use nurturing campaigns, you know, convert those people to buying members, and we would get a 300 or 400% return sort of over a 48 to 72 hour period. You know, and that stuff doesn't work as well anymore. You know, this is kind of to my point early on, like, you know, finding the opportunities for high volume, low cost access to, you know, eyes and ears is effectively what the art of the game is. In a business that's sort of that simple, you know, all the other stuff applies as well, like, you know, hack big levers. You know, so we very much try to find ways to effectively gain lifetime value out of ebook members. You know, so for now, again, like, you know, the term LTV and attention is kind of like, it's very conventionalized now in almost all digital businesses, even for e-com, it's yeah, average order value and average LTV, right? But back in this time, it just wasn't, you know, not a lot of people were talking about it at that point in time. But I think like for us, yeah, figuring out what the big levers are, finding cheap access to high volume audiences, and then just throttling it right up to the point where you can measure that it's no longer returning, and to be quite honest and blunt, move on to the next opportunity, you know?
Yeah, and this goes to sort of this market timing question, which you're alluding to. What I'm hearing is you couldn't launch Sweat with the same success using the same tools today. Like, would that be fair to say?
Oh, yeah, and that, I think, yeah, to be honest, that's kind of fair of like 99% of the businesses in the planet, right? You know, if there was a different version of Netflix available today and Netflix tried to launch today, they would have an incredibly difficult time, you know, trying to replicate that. You know, iTunes, you know, paying per song was an incredibly good business, you know, 15, 20 years ago. If you tried to launch that today, you know, as a brand new product, it just wouldn't work, and it gets swallowed up by Spotify, right? You know, so it's, I think, timing for a lot of things, whether it be timing for the product, you know, or, you know, timing for the business model, you know, and timing for the distribution strategies, like, you know, are all super relevant. You know, I mean, I made some of the points obviously about the, you know, the sort of marketing tactics and strategies. Like, a lot of those opportunities still exist today. They're just different. You know, TikTok is the flavor of the hour, right? That may or may not be relevant for the business you're building. You know, even if you get sort of hyper specific about, you know, subscription business models, you know, 10 years ago it was freemium everything. You know, now it's also in 2018, 19, it was premium everything, you know, and short-term trials. And then now it's going hybridized and kind of back down the opposite end of the spectrum, you know. So it's not so much that there was an opportunity that's come and gone. It's just the opportunity is always there, but it's always changing. And, you know, I think part of the job of entrepreneurs, founders, product people, marketers, whatever role it is that you're in, is you're figuring out like where actually is the opportunity, you know, and solving your way out of it.
I think that's such a powerful point. We did one of these meetups with Scott Farquhar a little while ago, and he said the same thing about Google ads. You know, they were running SEM campaigns in 2002, 2003 for 2 to 3 cent click-through rates, and you can't do that today.
No.
And so that's, you know, in some senses, it's a depressing message for founders, right? Like they listen to successful founders, hear their stories, and in a sense, they're not relevant today because those tactics don't work. But I think the point you've made, which is really powerful, is there are tactics. You just have to figure out what 2020's tactics are.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it's and the thinking and thought process is always the same. I think I think the example with Scott is great, right? Like as in you just could not build that business in the exact same way that they have today. Ultimately, the market has shifted, so drastically that it just wouldn't at all, it would not at all apply. But yeah, very much like the opportunities are always there. I think like I kind of touched on this a couple of seconds ago, like being able to categorize what they are and what you need is important. And I think a lot of the time people they only think about one of the several categories that apply. It's like, what's the next greatest product that I'm going to get? But without business model innovation, in a lot of regards, that product is kind of redundant. Or without a high volume of distribution to the product, to the right business model, that's also kind of redundant, right? So it can be a bit overwhelming. You kind of got to have the meeting of a couple of different things: the good product, the good business model, the good distribution channels. But I think to be honest, like the thought process, so all the information is so available now. Like a lot of this stuff's so publicly known. You can Google search a lot of this stuff to learn. Like I think we're on the horizon of more opportunity than ever, purely because information sharing is far more prevalent than ever. So.
Can we talk a bit about community? It's sort of a hot investment topic these days as people like me scrabble around trying to find things that we think are defensible in businesses. And I think community in a sense is a bit of a flavor du jour. If you can build a group of engaged people who love your brand and evangelize it to others, then that's something that grows upon itself. You guys did and continue to do a spectacular job of community building, both offline and online, actually. Talk about maybe Kayla in the early days, why she was special, and then how you've evolved the community from there.
Yeah, definitely. I think for Kayla, she's always had the incredible ability to be able to distill at one point in time like what's super important for a community. Which is probably like one of the greatest principles ever that I think we agreed and strategically implemented early on, was this nature of like specificity, or like niching, if you will. So for a long time we kind of and I use this a lot when talking about kind of brand and marketing as well. It's not always kind of what you're selling or what you're positioning yourself as. It's also kind of like what you're not. And for us, like being very heavily focused on women, very heavily focused on the goals and outcomes that they're seeking to achieve, and really trying to innately understand that was, super important for us early on. I think that specificity, manifested a lot of connection. And, again, I mean, obviously, like when you're looking at building an audience and a community and whatever, like you have to find a central passion, right, that they all want to connect around. You can't create a variety of them, and I think we actually see specificity playing out in a variety of different ways in business all over the world, today, as it relates to communities and content, right? Whether it be martial arts broadly or specific martial arts, hobbies, etc. A lot of these things are popping up all over the internet now. I think some of the stuff that Kayla specifically did really well early on, like I think that the female focus was one huge thing, but also I think this notion of like actually being like real and relatable and like connectable. You made a point about sort of bridging the gap between the online world and the offline world has been really important, but it's a philosophy that we kind of embodied, not necessarily just from connecting Kayla online with her audience offline, but also actually about connecting our audience online with our audience offline. And so that probably is kind of maybe a little bit strange, to hear, but we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of our members every year that meet up in person and go to the gym together and train together and run boot camps outdoors together. Like, and we manifested this and we invested in this, and we did our best to procure it at high volume, because ultimately, and we've always said this since day one, fitness is a social experience. So we weren't inventing a new type of community. We were just digitally manifesting it in a way that hadn't been done before. Again, kind of to your market timing point, and we lent into it really hard and found, to the whole, what's important to her and what she's passionate about. Who is that and what is that? The woman who's just had her first child and is trying to get back into fitness. Like that's a community within a community, right? We have a military mums community for women who are either in the military or have partners that are in the military. So we found a lot of these really small sub-existing groups within our community and found ways to bring them together, whether it was on social media, in-person events, on our forum that we have, online, lots of different ways. But I think like ultimately it really comes back to that specificity piece and, finding ways to connect them on shared passions, basically.
Tell me more about this idea of connecting them offline. You guys have run amazing fitness events, and it's really hard to pack out, a stadium full of people just bopping around in their gym gear. How do you do that? Why did you invest in that? And just tell us more about, because, it's easy to think about an online community like Strava, but I think what you guys have done differently is take it into the real world.
Yeah. It's a really fascinating topic. And I think one of the insights we garnered, really early on, like by being trainers and actually like having worked in gyms and, speaking with a lot of women sort of face to face and online was, like exercising is like actually really confronting, for a lot of women. And actually like going to gyms specifically is really confronting. Joining group fitness classes is really confronting. And so the notion of kind of like bringing these women together was, one of the points, there was a variety, but one of them was really about like, how can we bring the barrier down for her? Put her in an environment and surround her with a few thousand other people who are actually really just all the same. Like it's not like you show up to any event, and ours included, and there's just 5,000 Olympic athletes there. That's not the way. Like it's 5,000 everyday human beings coming in a room, to sweat together and share stories and, trade tips and tricks about how to stay motivated and continue, their journey and whatever together. And ultimately like that, being a really big barrier for her, like in a gym and publicly, like we, we took a bet, obviously, like ultimately we're always taking a bet on this stuff, but it really paid off for us because again, we created we had a specific place where she could come to talk about something she was passionate about, in a safe way. And so you can kind of hear as we talk about this more, there's all these kind of pillars, that we try to introduce, through our communication and through our approach to these type of events, effectively to manifest an environment where she can, feel supported, right?
And when you say paid off, maybe this is the investor in me asking this question, but how do you think about what that payoff looks like from the offline event and bringing them sort of back into your core product, which is the app subscription?
Yeah, it's really interesting actually. Been asked that question a lot of times. I think, to be honest, we never at all actually attributed, the people who came, who inquired, registered, and showed up. We never actually attributed them, from like a direct sales perspective. We more so looked at the return from a couple of different things. So we, reach and awareness was like a really big thing. For us, like how do these events drive reach and awareness? And, so we would drive, again, depending on how you choose to kind of value media as a channel, whether it's sort of, reach and impressions or advertising space rate or value equivalent, whatever. We would drive very, very big value with this, which is really good for us. And ultimately that was a win-win in the sense that, yes, we were getting great reach and awareness and volume, but we're actually also being seen, breaking down the barrier that we very deliberately wanted to break down. So it was very mindset shifting. Obviously what comes off the back of that type of media as well as inherently a huge amount of traffic and sales comes off the back of that. So it's revenue driving outside the people who participated in the actual event itself. So from some perspective, I think probably 2015 in June, we ran an event in Basketball City, I think it was in New York. A couple thousand people attended and we created content from that, which permeated our community through all of our social feeds for about a month. But ultimately also we did a lot of really great like media headline deals that were quite purposeful around showcasing transformation stories, publishing the workout video content from the event, bringing down the barriers to workout safety and confidence for women and motivation. And we were able to, through direct attribution from kind of like web, peer-to-peer traffic driving, we were able to, see that it was probably, anywhere between $250,000 and $400,000 in direct sales value just from that. So that doesn't obviously include any of the kind of amplified value, advertising efficiencies that happened acutely after the event, any other organic stuff which is not attributable to that. Really directly we're able to see from a few media outlets that we multiplied our money kind of overnight in that regard. But I mean, if we said that we did the events the first time, knowing that all of that was going to happen, like that would be a lie. Like we didn't, we weren't that sophisticated at that point. We took a bet, and then we measured and we backed ourselves in. Obviously, we assumed that we would net the value out of it, and we very, very much did. But again, this is kind of, to the point I mentioned earlier, like you need to, where is the best way to get access to cheap, high volume attention, right? Like that's the game.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting insight. You look at it on its face and you're like, why are these online guys and girls doing live events? But then when you describe the output of that, which is tons of local news content, brand recognition, ongoing video content, which you can parlay into the app, it's you can see the circle starting to work there.
And there was lots of like small bits that went along with that as well, right? So the initial versions were kind of just us running events. Then we decided, we'll get a bit more sophisticated. We partnered with media houses, so we did events with the SCA media group in Australia, like Bauer and Glamour magazine or whatever out of Europe through Germany and the Netherlands and such. Ultimately we ended up also then saying, how do we make it more spicy and interesting? So we smashed a couple of Guinness World Records out of the park. Another time, we tried like Woodward and Rose Bowl Stadium, which is a super famous, American venue that a lot of like Beyonce and whatever's run events at. So how do we make it interesting to get her attention, high volume in a cheap way, right? It's the same questions again and again and again. It's just ultimately different, I guess, experiments, executions of that. Because you can't expect, especially in today's kind of digital world, you can't expect to do the same thing every day and get it to work. And you also can't expect to do one thing and go bang and think it's going to make a business, because like ultimately it's not the one big thing. It's how many really intelligent things can you do at high velocity, every day of the year, basically.
Speaking of things that are newish, and one that's come in from the chat, someone, I'm trying to find the name, someone's asked you for your thoughts on the opportunity for Instagram TV and whether it's game changing.
I guess subjectively it depends how you define game changing, and exactly what that means. I think that the play here, if we look strategically, like video content consumption is probably, maybe you can divide it up into the duration and the content category, right, to create a really nice, framework, for content. YouTube owns moderate to long form content that's like non-traditional in terms of it's not like TV series or, movies and such. I mean, there is some stuff on there, but that's not really their play. Instagram and Facebook and such, they own that really like short form, bite-sized newsfeed content. If you look at Facebook Watch, you look at Instagram TV, like it's very clear that that's strategically their play here is to capture more screen time, right? Because I think like if you just defer temporarily away from the question about IGTV and say, well, what do Facebook and Instagram, et cetera, need to do successfully to grow their business? Well, they're effectively an inventory organization, and their inventory is you scrolling in their feed or consuming their content. Content consumption is effectively a proxy for ability for them to run an advert, right? So they need more screen time. And if they feel like they're seeing declining performance, or they're like hitting the top of the growth curve or whatever in short form content, photography, text content, et cetera, categorically, they need to find different venues for that. And if you look at something like Instagram stories, that was obviously a derivation of Snapchat, if we're frank, and that's fine. But they're trying to get access to the ephemeral content market, which is even quicker bite-sized pieces, smaller than the newsfeed again. If you look at Reels, they're trying to get into the hearts and minds of the individual hacky creator that's not famous yet. IGTV and Watch on Facebook is, moderate to long form content. They're trying to get into the people who are watching, creating and consuming that content, right? So I wouldn't necessarily suggest it's game changing. I mean, they're fascinating operators. They're really good at what they do. And I think it'll be good for them, but I don't think it's going to exactly kind of change the game and destroy YouTube overnight. Like I don't see that happening.
We've had a great question from Matt Dickinson, who you should probably meet actually, who runs a mindfulness.com, which is a freemium subscription app for mindfulness. Matt, I can actually see you on my screen, and you've asked such a great question. Can I just suggest you unmute yourself and rather than me read it out, you just have that conversation?
Sure. Hey guys. Hey Toby. Nice to meet you. The question, so we're finding at the moment, I agree, 100% agree with you that, what's the part of the game with all of this is that, how do you find people at scale, and it's always on the move. And I relate to Scott from back in the day. We were running a media company buying clicks on Google in 2006 for a couple of cents a pop. And You're just not seeing that these days. But one of the things that we're finding is working for us right now is rather than going straight for the jugular and, doing a Facebook ad straight to, to download the app, we're finding, which is a freemium experience, so people can come in and, use it quite a bit. And we're playing with the different hooks there with what's free and what's not. But we're finding that promoting like a free challenge. So we're running like a World Mental Health Day, 7-day challenge at the moment, but there's a live stream that we're promoting for free. So that's going from a Facebook ad basically to a lander that we're promoting this free event. Then the free event's on Friday morning, it's coming up. And then we're utilizing that to push people into the app to actually do the challenge every day for a week. The numbers and things like that seem to be working rather than going direct. I guess what else are you seeing at the moment with sort of channels and funnels that are working for you sort of at scale at the moment? And what's your gut say that's worth actually investigating next? What are you experimenting with? I know that, agree, TikTok, we've just started experimenting with TikTok and getting some cheap things there. But also some, second tier, like European countries, we're sort of seeing like, so really dividing things up by country is sort of helping out a bit as well.
Yeah, it's a really good question, mate, and it's interesting to hear you guys are having success with that. Like, I think for us right now, we have a series of like interesting and different problems, right? So if you 6 to 12 months ago, Snapchat, like great platform for us, like really, really good ROAS. Just to preference this with a caveat, like I'm not a marketing or performance marketing expert. I've just been along on the ride, but I think for us, like the return on ad spend, even for a subscription organization, for Snapchat was really good. Like it's pretty good quality inventory. But again, like when you spend it our size, like you hit thresholds, right? So we can't spend much more there. We're having to broaden to go into different geos and different age brackets and whatever to try and find more opportunity because our key market, it's not maxed out, but we're getting close kind of to the ceiling there. And obviously, as I'm sure your frequency goes up, performance comes down, et cetera, right? So I think for us, like, we regularly explore a couple of different things. Like TikTok is definitely a thing we're looking at now. But the sentence I said before around, finding the kind of high volume, high quality, low cost audiences, like those words are very deliberate, right? We don't just want volume, we want quality. We don't want volume and quality at high cost, we want low cost, right? So it's kind of the meeting of all of those things coming together. We think there's a really good, a really interesting kind of like market around this, micro, meso, influencer space. There's a lot of great research there. A few friends of mine own businesses and agencies in this particular space, and we see it to be quite efficient and effective. And ultimately, like our organization, kind of to John's remarks before, very community centric. And we have, hundreds of thousands of people that effectively are micro meso influencers that have advocated on our behalf for years. And so we see that as being a pretty good opportunity that we are beginning to explore. We'll probably continue to explore in the future in different ways. But awesome to see that you guys are having success with the current strategy, mate. It's great.
I feel like I could just hand this interview over to the community. I will connect you guys after this, because I think there's a lot to chat about in there.
Thanks, man.
Tobi, can we move on to COVID? My intuition tells me that a app-based remote fitness community would have exploded at a time when people couldn't go to the gym. But I'd just love to hear about your experiences in, March, April, May, what happened and sort of how you managed the business through that period. Yeah,
sure. I think you're definitely right. I think the assumption from the outside looking in would be sort of, fitness, gyms are closed, apps, that's probably pretty good. I think like the reality is, that COVID's been a challenging and unprecedented time for pretty well every person, every business, every founder on the planet, right? And I think that the behaviour has been anything short of sort of like simply predictable. Certain macro trends you would run an assumption about, i.e. fitness. There is more people working out at home because gyms are closed, right? But from a commercial perspective, that doesn't necessarily mean that it sort of stacks up perfectly for us. I think one of the key challenges for us was really responding to the needs and requests of a huge audience of people who ultimately have never worked out at home before, and that's people who work out in a gym, right? nearly half of our members, work out in gyms on a recurring basis. So we have to navigate with them and for them and on their behalf, create a variety of different content, humbly, like I think that we pivoted incredibly well. I think our team did a really tremendous job of creating new content and bringing it to market. Normally we would have sort of a 3 or 6 month pipeline to bring new content to the market in the way that we want it. We turned around sort of 3 or 4 large deployments of this in literally a matter of days. That really pulled off for us. And, even to sort of, Matt's point earlier on, we ended up bundling all that up into a challenge which we run as well, which is great for kind of manifesting engagement, among our audience. But I think for us, it meant a huge amount of reprioritization and such. There was a period of time, obviously, when, the media was kind of, perhaps for lack of a better word, flourishing. The media was everywhere about COVID and gyms shutting down and all this sort of stuff. That would have been, simply put, it would have appeared to be a really good time for the business because everyone wanted to buy apps and work out at home. But our business is fundamentally built upon, being a subscription model. Like we're fundamentally built upon generating a long-term relationship, with our customers. And ultimately, one thing that we know that all kind of subscription experts know is that like impulse is actually the killer of long-term relationships, right? And so, I mean, whether we kind of say, this gut instinct or whether we base it on data, we throttled pretty hard at the beginning of the opportunity in a way for us to provide, the best health and fitness support we could to our audience at that point in time. We also looked at the data and were pretty honest and said, well, we could see that the indicators were that a lot of these people maybe weren't in it for the long run. So we tried to find ways that we could get more value to them, to keep them engaged with our, with our platform, which was more content again. It was a challenge, new features and all this sort of stuff. But I mean, net, I think it's been positive for the trend that was already running at high velocity. And that really is the at-home fitness, minimal equipment fitness, and content consumed through an app for fitness are all kind of big macro trends, and they've certainly accelerated nonetheless.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you sort of touched there on something that I wanted to talk about a little bit, which is how you think about, leading indicators of engagement. What metrics do you care about? I'd love to hear you just talk through the things as the CEO that you track from a sort of product and community health perspective, and what you look for or what you try and move the needle on. Yeah.
I mean, earlier on, I said a sentence that was, kind of always trying to hack the big levers. And what I mean by that is like not all levers are made equal, in a funnel. So like the conversion lever is typically the one that everyone wants to play with. Like how can we get more people to sign up and like get into the app and whatever. But it's actually inherently almost the weakest lever in that process for building long-term sustainable growth and all. For us, like we very much kind of focused on journey to first value, or like how can we like get you to first value. So for us, like simply put, how quickly and how many people can we get to derive value, which we would normally say is completing their first workout, which we also kind of call the 0 to 1 problem. And then after that point, how can we get you effectively into a series of different like habits and routines, which is what we call the 1 to many problem. And these are not problems that exist just for us. They exist for a lot of apps in any category, and they do most definitely exist in the retail space for fitness. So from a metrics perspective, you are very much looking at like people that do trials, because we're currently a mostly trial oriented model. How many people are we able to actually get engaged during that 7-day period? And if they do engage, how engaged can we get them during that 7-day period? Because ultimately those two things are the biggest lead indicator for conversion from trial to paying, and the much biggest indicator for conversion from paying to retained, obviously when their bill rolls over, whether they're a monthly or an annual member or whatever else. We actually call out like first month renewal rate is a solid one of our KPIs, because obviously it's an acute representation of improvements in retention. So in other words, if we measure improvements in engagement, at the front end of the experience, we also make sure that they're backed up with the first month renewal rate. And that's definitely what we're looking at a very regular basis from a product perspective. Obviously, like in my seat, I see an array of different metrics from all the different teams, whether it be sort of commercial, financial, member related. One thing that we've really sort of started to lean into a little bit, like specifically in the product space, is what we would kind of call like traction metrics. We sort of started using this term internally, which is a representation of when we deploy new features and new content and such, and they move a needle, but not the needle. And what I mean by that is, so, from a retention perspective, a really, simple philosophy could be like, if you just make customers more happy more often, eventually you retain more people and win. And very often, when we release a lot of features, we recently rolled something out, a couple of weeks ago, which we're getting like massive customer satisfaction score on, like absolutely gigantic CSAT, and feedback is awesome, but it really hasn't moved a lot of the needles, that we would otherwise expect in terms of engagement and retention yet, right? And not in a way that we're able to measure. And so I think, a lot of the time people in my seat or people on the outside get so fixated on hard metrics, which I think they should, like LTV and renewal rates and engagement, time value, payback period, ROAS, all those sorts of things. But I think it's also important, and we've been leaning a little bit more into like, well, how much satisfaction is being derived from the new things we're adding to our product, as opposed to just, are they shifting the bottom line? Because that's a long way away from the feature, obviously.
Yeah, it's really interesting, balancing the overall product experience with specifically measurable things. Vinesh has asked an interesting question in the chat, which I don't know if you'll be able to answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. I think what he's asking is whether fitness outcomes have been tracked for your members in comparison to physical gyms.
So yeah, maybe I'll just repeat that back just to make sure that I actually understand it. So I guess the question is sort of asking, are we more efficient at actually achieving, goal-oriented outcomes for our members than gyms?
That's how I'm reading it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it'd be really hard to get a lot of data, obviously, from gyms on this. We have historically had some access to some things which we would probably use as a proxy for that. So if we try to do everything as a binary survey, did you or did you not achieve your outcome? We probably wouldn't be able to answer that. Like I said, we could get that for our members, but we wouldn't necessarily be able to get it for others. However, if we run the assumption that people who do ever train at all, and do continue to train regularly, either A, have achieved their goal, or B, are more likely to actually achieve their goal, and we compared those two stats between the business models, so i.e., registration rate to workout and then workout frequency and recency, effectively on the journey. Anecdotally, with the information we have available to us, we do it better. The gyms actually have a larger, typically have a larger fall off rate. But again, like the metrics here shift so much. Like all gyms are not made equal. Are we talking about health clubs, big box gyms, 24/7s, boutiques, specialist PT studios? Like the rates are so different.
I reckon your best answer here is that Kayla surely has more before and after photos than anyone else in the world.
Yeah, I suggest we have a lot more of those. And so if that was the hard measure of success, I suggest that we've done a pretty amazing job, in that regard. So yeah.
Hey, I'm just mindful of time, and there's a sort of chunky topic that we haven't touched on that I do want to cover. You've built this company out of Adelaide, which hats off to you, and I'm a big fan of our South Australian friends, but it's not obvious that a company like this emerges from a place like Adelaide, or that when you hit the scale that you're at, when you need an executive team and 100+ employees, that you would be able to find talent in a place like that for a app-based subscription business. Yep. How have you done that? How have you kind of built the team, and how do you see that moving forward?
Yeah, it's a pretty regular topic of conversation, I think, as it relates to our business, but I think also, to be honest, just in South Australia in general, and probably, frankly, even in Australia, you would have more access to this than I would, John, but it effectively all, really is circling around this. What are the businesses of the future that are going to contribute significantly to the economy, and what capabilities do we need to build those businesses? Look, going back sort of 5, 6, 7 years ago when we started, not a lot of capability here in Adelaide, and certainly not a huge amount of capability even in Australia. Even when we went to sort of like, you're looking at performance marketing teams and growth teams and all that sort of stuff, there's not a huge ecosystem in Australia, of those people. And then obviously South Australia is a very small, arguably even less dense version of that. I think so.
Just to interrupt you, Toby, as a data point on that, the most advertised and hardest to fill role in our portfolio of 50 companies are growth marketers.
There you go. And also transparency, like our head of performance marketing wasn't recruited within Australia. So there's a pretty clear message there, right? It's a capability that's not just lacking in Adelaide, it is lacking in Australia. And it's a bit of a mindset and cultural piece as much as actually is a capability, right? Like the capability is derived from your mindset, like how you view business and what you want to do. And I just think we've got another couple of years to go here in Australia before that kind of becomes, I guess, conventionalized. And that'll probably help your portfolio companies a lot. But I think, going back to the piece on South Australia, at the end of the day, you can probably kind of get short, sharp here and kind of say, well, you either buy the capability, by recruiting it or consulting or whatever it is, or you build the capability by training it, and we've had to kind of play a bit of a tug of war between the two over time, depending on the complexity of the capability that we need and the time frame in which we need it. If we need it immediately tomorrow, we're probably not going to recruit, right? We'll probably get a consultant somewhere in the world to help us do that in the interim between today and when we're able to recruit for that. If it's a capability we don't need immediately, and it's one that has probably less complexity, we'll try and build it. We'll find an employee that's closely aligned to that from a mindset perspective and a knowledge perspective, and we'll pivot their knowledge. We're pretty, in my opinion only, and I'm biased, but we're pretty, deep into capability building internally. Like we publish all of our research papers, all of our data, everything to every single employee in the company. They're constantly publicly available. Nothing is ever private. Anyone can get access to it. All of our metrics and reporting come through in Slack feeds that anyone can review and ask questions about. We have massive open forums and Q&As every couple of weeks. Like we're very forward on that. Like even we have a very specifically curated library of books that are available for employees that they can come and get at any given point in time, which some I've selected, some other people have added, but you can get like Hacking Growth by Sean Ellis, you can get Subscribed by Tian Zhu, like you can get Subscription Marketing by Ann Janza. Like these are the kind of, in my opinion, like hygienic books that people in our space should be reading, right? I mean, we gently force those upon people in certain roles in the organization to try to forward think and develop their capability, because at the end of the day, it's very unlikely that it would be a very fixed mindset to run the assumption that you're going to have a team that's perfectly consistent of all the capabilities at all the maturity levels that you need at that exact point in time. Like it just doesn't really happen.
Yeah, I think that's resonates completely with me. And I would, I would love a password to your Slack account. I think I could spend days geeking out on Wet's metrics somehow. Guys, last time I did one of these, I ran 15 minutes over and Mel got me in a lot of trouble for doing so. So I'm going to actually wrap this up on time for once. Toby, we might leave it there on the discussion. I've missed a couple of questions in the chat, but none of them you're going to be able to cover in a minute and a half. So thank you so much for joining us and contributing to this community. I think the thing I've loved about this conversation is businesses like Sweat in particular, and maybe this is true of most consumer businesses, look so glamorous and sexy from the outside. And, you've got wonderful imagery and fancy videos and whatnot, but the nuts and bolts of, subscription economics and growth marketing and all these things are just so pivotal to making these businesses work well. And you guys have, frankly, you've nailed the boring stuff, which I think is a huge part of why you're so successful. So hats off to you, and thanks for sharing those lessons with our community. No
worries. Thanks for having me. And I think, to be honest, congratulations for everyone on the call as well. Like I think you're in the right spot. I'm not necessarily just listening to me, but I mean, everyone else is dialing in, and obviously the AirTree group, fascinating bunch of super smart people here in the community. So I think it's awesome to see. Thanks for having me, mate.